In every city, there are streets the streetlights forget. Places where the fog doesn't lift, it settles. Into the bones. Into the records. Into cases no one wants reopened. They told her it would be simple. Walk in. Walk out. Don't look back. But nothing in this world stays buried. And everyone looks back, eventually. Some crimes don't end when the sirens fade. They send out waves. Through testimony. Through memory. Through the people who survive them. They reverberate.
Help me.
This is one of those cases. This is reverberating noir.
Picture a road, a dirt road cutting through western Massachusetts. November 1805. The trees are bare. The sky is the colour of iron. And somewhere on that road, a man is riding home on horseback. He'll never get there.
And two other men, two innocent men, will hang for it.
This is the story of Dominic Daley and James Halligan. Two Irish immigrants, two Catholics, two nobodies, as far as the state of Massachusetts was concerned, accused of a brutal murder. Convicted on almost nothing. And executed before anyone thought to ask the right questions.
It took 178 years for the state to admit it got it wrong.
178 years. Let that sit for a moment. To understand how this happened, you have to understand the world these men walked into. America in 1805 was a young country, barely 22 years out from the end of the Revolutionary War. Thomas Jefferson was president. Lewis and Clark were pushing west. On the surface, it looked like a nation building something new.
But underneath that, there were serious fault lines, and one of the deepest ran straight through New England's relationship with Irish Catholic immigrants.
Waves of Irish men and women were arriving on American shores, driven out by poverty, by British oppression, by desperation. And they were not welcome.
Not even close. Newspapers ran ethnic slurs dressed up as jokes. Employment ads said outright, "No Irish need apply." In some New England towns, Catholic priests were legally barred from officiating marriages or burying the dead within town limits. This wasn't casual prejudice. It was institutional.
And it was into that atmosphere, that world, that Dominic Daley and James Halligan arrived. Daley was a labourer, Irish-born, Catholic, probably in his late 20s. By all accounts, quiet, hard-working. The kind of man who leaves almost no trace in the historical record because nobody thought men like him were worth recording.
Halligan was younger. Same background, same story. The two were friends, probably traveling the same work circuits, digging, clearing land, building the early American infrastructure that nobody gave them credit for.
No money, no connections, no powerful friends. In 1805 Massachusetts, that combination didn't just make you vulnerable, it made you a target. November the 5th, 1805. A farmer named Marcus Lyon set out on horseback from Springfield, heading home to Wilbraham. He never made it.
The next morning, his body was found on the roadside near a place called Warner's Bridge in what is now Ludlow. He'd been beaten severely about the head, then shot, multiple times. His pockets were empty. His horse was gone.
Marcus Lyon was not an anonymous man. He was a landowner, a farmer with deep roots in the community, a man of standing. And the pressure on local authorities to find his killers was immediate and intense.
Which is exactly where things start to go wrong.
The first mistake was an assumption. The assumption that the killers had to be outsiders. No local man would commit this crime, the reasoning went, so the perpetrators must be transients, drifters, strangers passing through.
And that assumption made almost immediately, before any real investigation colored every single lead that followed. It's a classic cognitive bias. Confirmation bias, essentially. You decide on the answer first, and then you find the evidence to support it.
Then a man named David Wilson came forward. He claimed that on the day of the murder, he'd seen two men near the crime scene, acting suspiciously, he said. Rough-looking, poorly dressed. Irish, he said. Or foreign.
That was enough to cast a dragnet.
A few weeks later, Dominic Daley and James Halligan were spotted in Northampton about 20 miles away. They were arrested. They had no money. no alibi anyone was willing to credit, and no one to speak for them.
They fit the description. Vaguely. And in that climate, vaguely was all it took.
They were perfect suspects. Now let's talk about what the prosecution actually had, because this is where the story becomes genuinely disturbing.
The cornerstone of the entire case was David Wilson's identification. He said he saw them near the scene. But here's the problem, he'd glimpsed them briefly. From a distance, in uncertain light, and weeks had passed before he saw them again in custody. Even today, eyewitness identification under those conditions would be treated with serious skepticism. In 1805, it was treated as gospel.
Beyond Wilson, the prosecution had a collection of circumstantial details that barely held together. A man named Elisha Bagg claimed Halligan had tried to sell him a horse. It wasn't Lyon's horse. Another witness said he'd seen them with a gun. The gun was never produced, and the prosecution's implicit final argument was simply this: they were poor Irishmen, and poor Irishmen commit crimes.
No murder weapon linked to them, no stolen property found in their possession, no credible witness who placed them at the scene at the precise time of the killing, no motive established beyond a stereotype.
That was the case. That was what two men's lives were worth. The trial was held in Northampton in the spring of 1806. The presiding judge was Theodore Sedgwick, a respected man, a future congressman. Respected, but not just.
The jury was composed entirely of native-born Protestant men. They were Marcus Lyon's peers, not Daley and Halligan's. And that distinction mattered enormously.
The defense lawyers were assigned, not chosen. They had almost no resources to investigate, no real ability to challenge the prosecution's witnesses. And they were operating inside a community that had already made its decision.
The prosecution didn't need to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. They needed to confirm what the jury already believed. And they did that by painting Daley and Halligan as wandering vagabondsmen without homes, without roots, without respect for life or property. Men who were, by their very nature, capable of this.
David Wilson took the stand, told his story. Nobody pushed back seriously. Nobody asked him hard questions. Nobody examined his own background or his possible connections to the crime. His word was taken as settled fact.
The jury deliberated for less than an hour.
Guilty. No outburst in the courtroom, no shock, because the verdict was exactly what the community had expected and demanded. June the 5th, 1806. Daley and Halligan were led from the Northampton jail to the gallows. A crowd gathered. Executions were public, then designed to be seen, to serve as a warning.
Both men were given the chance to speak their last words. Both men said the same thing. They were innocent.
James Halligan looked out at that crowd, and he said, "I declare before God, and as I hope for salvation through the merits of my blessed Saviour, that I am innocent of the crime for which I am about to suffer. I never saw Marcus Lyon until I saw him dead. I never struck him, nor shot him, nor had any hand in his death."
Then the trapdoor opened.
They were buried in unmarked graves. Their names began to fade almost immediately. But not everyone was comfortable with what had just happened. Almost immediately after the execution, quiet doubts started circulating. The speed of the trial, the thinness of the evidence, the fact that two men had walked to the gallows insisting right to the very end that they were innocent.
For nearly 180 years, the case sat in the footnotes of Massachusetts legal history. A curiosity, a relic of a rougher time. And then historians and legal scholars started looking at it again. And what they found was deeply unsettling.
The theory that emerged the most compelling one centers on David Wilson.
Here's what researchers uncovered. There's evidence suggestive, though not definitive, that a relative of Wilson's may have had a personal motive to harm Marcus Lyon. A land dispute, perhaps. A grudge. Or a robbery that escalated into something worse.
If that's true, then Wilson's testimony looks entirely different. By pointing the finger at two anonymous Irishmen, he may have been deliberately shielding his own family. He gave the authorities exactly what they wanted, foreign villains, and in doing so, he walked his kin right out of the frame.
Now, to be clear, this theory is circumstantial. No definitive evidence has ever surfaced. Historians are careful to note that the identity of Marcus Lyon's real killer has never been established with certainty. But the theory fits the known facts in a way that's very hard to dismiss.
It explains why Wilson was so confident in his identification, despite the poor viewing conditions. It explains why he came forward so quickly, and it explains the hardest question of all, why these two men, why Daley and Halligan specifically, out of everyone on that road.
And before we go further, if you're finding this story as gripping as we do, hit subscribe. We dig into cases exactly like this one, forgotten, buried, and overdue for the light. It takes about 2 seconds, and it means the world to us.
The push to clear their names gained real momentum in the 1980s. Bishop Joseph F. Maguire of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Springfield became a central figure in that effort. For the Church, this wasn't just a legal question, it was a moral one. Daley and Halligan hadn't just been convicted of a crime they didn't commit. They'd been killed, in part, for who they were.
Working alongside historians, lawyers, and state legislators, Bishop Maguire petitioned the Massachusetts Governor's Council and the legislature for a formal exoneration, not a retrial. Not an attempt to prove who actually killed Marcus Lyon, simply an acknowledgement that the trial had been fundamentally unjust, that the state bore responsibility for these deaths.
On March the 15th, 1984, Governor Michael Dukakis signed it into law. The document declared that Dominic Daley and James Halligan had been wrongfully convicted and executed, that their names were, and I'm quoting directly, cleared of any and all guilt.
A formal ceremony was held in Northampton, near the site of the gallows, 178 years later, but it happened.
Too late for the two men, but not too late to matter. One question remains, and it will likely never be answered. If not Daley and Halligan, then who killed Marcus Lyon?
The Wilson theory is the most plausible lead we have, but without hard evidence, it stays a theory. The truth died with the real killer, and with David Wilson, who carried his secrets to his grave.
What we're left with is the shape of an injustice. We know 2 innocent men were hanged. We know the system failed them at every single step. We know that their Irishness, their Catholicism, their poverty, all of it was used against them before a single piece of evidence was examined.
And that's the part that should unsettle us most. Because the mechanisms that killed Daley and Halligan, the othering, the confirmation bias, the assumption of guilt based on identity, those mechanisms didn't vanish in 1806. They evolved. They show up in courtrooms today, in headlines today. Whenever a system under pressure looks for the most convenient suspect rather than the right one.
The safeguards exist, the rights are written down, but rights on paper are only as strong as the people who enforce them. And in a room full of fear, in a community that's already decided those words can mean almost nothing.
Daley and Halligan had rights. On paper. In practice, they had nothing.
If you drive out to Ludlow, Massachusetts today, near where Warner's Bridge crosses that old stream, you won't find a monument. The road is paved, the farms are gone, the landscape has moved on. But somewhere nearby, in ground that was never properly marked, 2 men are buried. Men who came to America looking for a better life. Men who were accused by a stranger, convicted by strangers, and hanged by a state that didn't want to hear what they were saying.
They kept saying it anyway, right to the end.
We are innocent.
It took 178 years for anyone in power to admit they were telling the truth.
History is full of stories that resist tidy endings. The murder of Marcus Lyon, the lies of David Wilson, the hanging of 2 innocent men. These facts are clear, but the full truth, the complete picture, remains just out of reach. We have to live with that.
And maybe that's the point. Sitting with the discomfort of an unresolved injustice. That's what keeps us honest. That's what keeps us asking the right questions.
Don't forget them. And don't pretend the lesson doesn't still apply.
If this episode stayed with you, and I hope it did, subscribe to the channel, leave us a comment, tell us what you think happened on that road in November of 1805. We read every single one.
We'll be back next week with another case that history almost forgot. Until then, stay curious, stay critical, and never stop asking who benefits from the story being told the way it is.
And so the file closes. But the case doesn't. Not for the families. Not for the witnesses who still pause before answering questions. Not for a city that remembers, even when it pretends not to. The evidence sits somewhere in a box. The photographs fade. The names are spoken less often. But the echoes remain. If this story stayed with you, if you felt that silence at the end of each unanswered question, subscribe to the channel. Not for us, for the stories that never got a second look, for the voices that were cut short, for the cases that refused to stay buried. Because the truth doesn't disappear. It waits.
And as long as the questions are still unanswered, the case isn't over. It's just waiting for someone to look again.
And here, it keeps reverberating.